Good evening. It's inauguration day, I guess. And Sean sent me a link to a recent podcast by an outlet called the Y Files, which I was not familiar with, but the WHY Files, and it's a YouTube channel, or you can find it on YouTube, that has like 4 million something subscribers. And it's kind of like, I don't know, the focus is sort of, the unusual things. I guess in the past it's been a lot maybe about like aliens or Atlantis or Lemuria or ancient things that are exciting and interesting for people to look at. But this particular episode that he sent was focused on actually wolves exposed to radiation at Chernobyl and how it's part of the next human potential movement in terms of low-dose radiation hormesis. And it covers a lot of topics that we've been talking about for the past year or so. So he's like, yeah, it's made the big times now. Like it went up, I guess there's a huge, watching base of this. So the things that I've been talking about and trying to sort of do it in a very instructive, heavy way with like a 6-hour podcast on next gen nuclear and what it means for the climate narrative and for the health sector and radioactive isotopes and thorium reactors. It gets compressed into like an 18-minute pod that's like essentially pitching all of this as the next greatest thing, right? And so it wasn't just the radiation, it was then like human potential movement. It involved the melanin, it involved quantum biology, and then it sort of veered off into things that bumped up against things that Joseph has been talking about with the quantum field and consciousness, although not exactly framed the same way. So now it's something that they want you to know about, but from a particular viewpoint, from a particular vantage point, and people seem to be all up for having their radioactive superpowers. I used to sort of joke that in the future, you're going to pay a premium to have a house with a radon in the basement. That is coming. And the first time I really was talking about that was, I think, with Lynn and Jason. We did a debrief of a conversation. Maybe it was Mark Andreessen's interview or one of his interviews on Joe Rogan, and the next gen nuclear was a big part of that. So when Sean sent that to me today, I'm like, okay, I have had these notes sitting around for 2 months about Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz's post-election overview. And so about the Trump election and what it means for fintech and little tech and crypto. And given the prominence of crypto attached to Trump coming into office with these crazy crypto coins and speculative markets and like, what are these things? I don't think it's really about money. I think it's about imprint signals, intelligence, and imprinting, and ideas having people and egregores and digital semiotics and swarm intelligence and mind viruses and all sorts of things, and like maybe a little bit to do with money, but a lot of other things. So to me, it's just pulling back the curtain on like, yes, buckle up, folks. We are now entering the fintech zone. So I just wanted to go through some of these notes, and I'm not pulling all the clips. I'll put the link to their discussion in the pinned comment, and so that you guys can check it out. It's only an hour, and you can see if your take lines up with my take or not. But I wanted to go ahead and just so I can like clear off. I've been dusting and things, doing some New Year's cleaning, so I can tidy up around the house and throw out these notes once I get them on board. So essentially, the big gist of this discussion, and again, it's Mark Andreessen, his wife, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen, was a professor at Stanford, and she was one of the main drivers behind social impact finance. So Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, his colleagues at A16Z, they are the main force behind sort of what they call little crypto. And when I try to talk to people about crypto, they think it's about money. And I'm like, well, there's a layer there that's about money, but it's really about Web3 and token engineering and social systems and signaling and information theory, at the base of it. And people don't understand that. And, Jason and Leo and we have been talking about this for like quite a number of years. And people just keep saying, I don't understand, I don't understand, I don't understand. But really, it's about the internet coming into the world and having sort of logic gates and yes, no opportunities tied to tokens with incentives built in that kind of make, it's not like the world isn't already a game, but it's a different kind of game that involves automated interactive processing and the way in which we're responding to the internet in the world, like your smart refrigerator or your smart car or your smart Alexa or your smart wallet, is that there are incentives and restrictions and promotions built into all of these things to guide behavior in this flow state to create, in my opinion, a large distributed collective intelligence. And so if we're not understanding the signaling, the information technology as a signaling and coordination mechanism, we're kind of missing the point. But at one point, money is a signaling and coordination mechanism to a certain extent, but now that we've got all different other kinds of tokens that are not traditional currency, that might be behavioral related tokens, things that really go back to those, what do you call it, loyalty cards in your wallet, right? Like you go to Kroger and you swipe your card, there are points that are attached to that, or coupons at the CVS. There are a lot of really simple ways of like alternative currencies that incentivize certain choices that already exist. But we wouldn't look at them and say, oh, this is connected to a token engineering. But my suggestion is on the back end, it actually is. And I say this because one of the early behavioral incentive programs that I experienced in Philadelphia was tied to some folks that came, at least one of the founders, I think, came out of the Wharton School, and it was Recycle Bank, and that you were supposed to put a sticker with a barcode on your recycle bin, and every time you recycled, the trash truck would scan that you were participating, and then depending on your level of community engagement, you would get paid back in points that you could then redeem for things like discounts or movie tickets or things like that. But for the most part, people don't recycle for that reason, like to get points. They just do it because it's part of their habit, and it's what they do when they put out the trash is they do the recycling. It's a social norm. And so for the most part, the recycle bank points just built up and nobody really used them. And then the recycle bank thing like went kaboom and it was done. And before they closed it out, they said, oh, you can give all the recycle bank points to like schools for community gardens. And so some of that happened. But this was an incentivized behavior that was non-traditional currency. And again, it's coming at least in part out of Wharton. So you pay attention to those things, right? And that is the internet being in the world because there's a barcode in your recycle bin and the trash can. So it's scanning. So it's these basic things. But that's just the baby step of where things are coming next. And this is going to be built out by little tech, which is what A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz does. And again, it's embedded in with Laura Arrillaga Andreessen's focus on social impact finance. And social impact finance foundationally is about engineering society towards certain optimization metrics for impact, again, as to create financial flows for public-private partnerships, but also they're often aligned to these sustainable development goals. And so it's a recursive system to engineer to society towards some outcome. But then the question is, to what degree are we participating and deciding what the metrics are, and if we agree with them? And then they know this, so the future is going to be that part of the token participation is you're doing voting with tokens. And I think we can see with some of these meme coins that they're almost like a vote, like a communication. You might be buying into like a speculative meme coin because you're thinking you're going to make some money on it, but often it's like putting your thumb on the scale for the message that's going out attached to that meme coin. And so it's a semiotic signal. And so we're in this weird fuzzy space where like money and votes and signaling are all squashed together in this murky way that we're not trained to think about it like that yet. But I would say we need to start to think about that. So the big point of this debrief between Mark and Ben was essentially to see it like, whew, we're so glad that old administration, the Biden administration, is gone because they hated us. They hated little tech and they hated fintech, and we didn't know why, and they wouldn't take a meeting, and we don't know what the problem was, but they were just putting roadblocks in front of us every which way, not just for the fintech, but also for the AI and the technology, and that's what Americans do, and that's what we have to do because, China and the next Cold War. So we're so glad that the Biden administration is out the door. And now we have someone here who is our ally, and we're ready to roll. We're ready to build the next version of the internet, essentially, is sort of where they're at. And I think it's important to understand, again, these as archetypes, right? And when the last talk I gave, I talked about the pendulum, right? The pendulum swing. And, you know, as much as I think many people enjoy a good team sport, you know, it takes two to have a game, and at least two, and definitely politics is a game. And most of the larger policy flows or civilizational shifts are happening at a higher level than anyone who is in office. And so most of the things in any given administration are handled by like career public officials who are managing the things, and the government is an extension of finance and among other things. And so depending on who's handing it off, there are stories that get handed off with different administrations, like, oh, this administration is this archetype, this administration is this archetype, and they play them off against one another. But in my lifetime, what I've seen is there's very few times where things get rolled back permanently. There's just something that's rolling in the tide, it's rolling in, and no matter who's fronting the State of the Union address, it's just coming. And so my suggestion is it behooves us to try to figure out what are the trends that are coming. And Mark and Ben are really sort of leaders in the trends that are coming, no matter who's there. But now that they have Trump, they can use Biden as a foil to legitimize their political engagement. And so I think this is really important because they opened out starting talking about their Fairshake PAC. And just to like an interesting anecdote, like their opening anecdote, Ben said, can you believe it? Even the Amish, the Amish are voting now. They don't normally vote because Biden was raiding farms that were selling unpasteurized milk. And then they were letting big crimes like, you know, car thief rings just run rampant over all the big cities of the United States. And so the nice law-abiding people who just like to sell you some fresh milk are getting the axe, where the organized crime is fine and just getting, and it's kind of ridiculous, but it is these extreme examples that then feed into the narrative archetype of like, this is why we need to go back in this new way, because like, can you believe anybody would mess with the nice Amish people? Like, that's crazy. How could you align with that? And so that was sort of their opening pitch, Ben's opening pitch. And then Mark went into saying, so this is why we have to have our super PAC. And it was called the Fairshake PAC. And the focus was bipartisan on good crypto policy. And so when they were doing this debrief, they said that their PAC had 52 wins and 6 losses, which is pretty good. I mean, I don't know how well PACs normally do, but that's like well beyond 50-50, 52 wins and 6 losses. And so they were essentially going in and briefing people on crypto, because most people in Congress, it was, as they would say, not top of mind, right? But of course, when they're pitching crypto, I think they're pitching it as finance. They're not necessarily pitching it as biosemiotics or social token engineering. They're pitching it as fintech policy. So anyway, but it's important to know that this was a nonpartisan thing. And essentially, they just kept saying, like, Biden hated us. The Biden administration hated us, and they would never tell us why they hated us, because everybody wants crypto, and how are you going to stop the future? And now the founders who wanted to run all of these fintech and little tech projects are quote unquote, let out of jail. And these crazy agendas that were happening in the background under the Biden administration are now over, because now we have good communication with the incoming administration, which is Trump. And they were always, because, you know, they're based in Silicon. Well, I don't know if they're still based in Silicon. I think they still are based in Silicon Valley. And so they were very clear to say, we don't agree on the social policies, but we're not talking. They didn't say they disagree. They just said, we're not commenting on social policies. The only thing that we're supporting Trump on is the tech policy. And that is top tier policy. And that is the thing that we want. And that they got, you know, essentially. So now that the leash is off and they are off and running. And A16Z is essentially considered the leader in little tech. So we're going to increasingly hear these narratives about scary big tech like Google and Amazon, but then you've got the little guys, you've got the little startups, and then A16Z is the venture capital who's paying for all of those and trying to pick out the next Google of AI. Okay, so essentially they were like, well, Trump has a sweeping mandate, the biggest since Reagan. And this is sort of identified by the fact that when post-election, the stock market went crazy, even though there was no real actionable information about assets or the economic situation that was any different. It was simply that there was a new administration coming in, and then it was Trump, and that the stock market responded like, I mean, they said they couldn't believe how crazy it was. It made no sense, but it does because it's a signal. It's a signal. Okay, so the big thing with Trump, the big story, and again, he's another archetype. They play off against each other. You know, they're extremes. The Biden-Trump thing is that we have to win. We have to win, you know, and we have to win in fintech and bio and defense tech and AI and public safety tech. Public safety tech is also important in terms of the surveillance, because why? The next Cold War. And this for me is where I keep going back and thinking, like, I didn't understand. Like, look up the Pugwash conferences, and those were set up by a protege of Rockefeller up in Pugwash, Nova Scotia in the post-war era. And there were a lot of atomic scientists. This kind of goes back to the radiation hormesis that were, protesting the atomic weapons, but they wanted to use atoms for peace. And so throughout the Cold War, many of the top scientific minds were all meeting together under the auspices of the Pugwash conferences. So I have a big question about like how real the Cold War really was, and why we were building all of these weapons, and if really it's like to dismantle them now and use the radioactive isotopes for something else, and to again weaponize space and create some cover so the Soviet Union could develop some really amazing psychotronic weapons, and then we like meet together in 2020. That seems to be the case, and so I have a lot of questions about what the Cold War really was and what this Atoms for Peace project really was, and I go into that in another two-part really long video that I did around RFK Jr. and the climate stuff and next-gen nuclear. So if you're interested in that, there's way more about the nuclear side of things. But we need China to justify our investment. So it has to be the AI race, right? Instead of the space race, we need the AI race and the drone race. That's another thing that they bring up, is that that is the focus. So we need for there to be a perception that we're against China and China's against us and we're fighting it out. But if you actually understand and you imagine that big tech isn't in China, like Silicon Valley and China and Korea, like they're like this and they're intertwined. And, all you have to do is look and realize, Susquehanna International Group and Jeffrey Yass, they were the main primary investors in TikTok. So it's not disconnected, it's interconnected. Epic Games, when they developed Fortnite, their main funders for that were WeChat in China. So the us versus them is a convenient team sport narrative and a driver of the investment on both sides. But it's pretty shallow. If you just scrape a little bit, you'll realize that it's kind of fake. Okay, so then they go on to say, like, is tech the top tier policy? Like, why is tech the most important issue? And within that, the idea is the world is a dangerous place and China is the next threat. And, the only reason we won and we beat out Russia was because they couldn't keep up with our tech development. And so therefore, we're going to do it all over again, and this time with China. And then they go into this issue of debanking. And they go back to the liberals, they go back to Obama and the choke point in the banking systems around the drug money and the legalization of marijuana, and how all kinds of things were used to choke out fintech based on these older policies of regulating around drug money. And that what they were saying was that what the Biden administration did was extra legal and unconstitutional and not fair and went beyond what the president should have been able to do in terms of limiting fintech regulation or limiting fintech through regulation, that it wasn't actually constitutional, and that it was totalitarian and authoritarian, and they were terrorizing all of these companies doing fintech. So what I'm saying is you can see this coming up. Is like the FTX debacle, where there were things that definitely happened that were bad, is that now they can come back and say, yeah, they were doing some things that were problematic, but now we're going to have better laws and better regulation, and that is going to lead to more things being accountable and transparent on the blockchain. So that frees them up for blockchain. It also frees them up for automated governance systems with smart contracts. So building smart contracts into the legal system and into the banking systems, that they can say, we're not against regulation, we just are against unfair use of power, as exampled by the Biden administration. So if we put it all on blockchain, we will have trust, quote unquote, that no matter which side is in charge, that it's fair if it's all automated by AI. But again, I have a lot of questions. I continue to have questions about blockchain in that situation. But the debanking issue is allowing them to sort of move into a more, I think, digital blockchain regulation space. Okay, and then, okay, so they go on to say, like, the surreal increase in market value after the election, that crypto soars, even though there's no real economics behind it. But all of this boost in the crypto space, which is a signal, gives the Trump administration more legitimacy to have a mandate to do some sweeping changes that I've been saying that I think are coming all the time. And again, it's not as though the Biden administration is a foil for this. And so it's the progression of the long-term plan. First you do this, and then you get the attention and the energy set in this direction, and then you add this, and this redirects it as a resolution to whatever issues were in this. And then they keep trading hands. And so whatever the plan is to develop this tokenized swarm intelligence, Web3, internet as the whole world scenario, they need both parties, and probably also the Green Party and the Libertarians are in on this thing, whether they understand it or not. They just play their different little pieces and they keep handing it down the lane. Okay, so essentially now Mark Andreessen's like, now we can do all the things that we've wanted to do all along, and isn't it terrible that the Biden administration was regulating law-abiding companies that were just trying to add value, and they were ignoring all of the real threats of people who were doing violent crime and breaking laws? And, again, there's part of things you can't really dispute it, but it's like, well, yeah, I mean, I was in Philly, like we had a Soros DA, we see these things happening, but they're happening as a foil for the next thing. And the next thing doesn't necessarily mean that's a better thing. It's just the next thing in the progress. Okay, so but they're just going on and on about Biden's repression of the crypto people and the debanking threat and FTX. Ben Horowitz had an interesting observation. He was saying that Korea doubled their crypto usage. And of course, Korea is Samsung, and huge Samsung plant in Austin. And I'm going to be talking about Austin more at some point when I get my Big Heart Intelligence map put together. But there's this idea of falling behind, and that it's not just crypto, but that the tokens are also used in the AI development. And so tokenization, I think, is part of these large language models and training the AI sets and the neural nets. And so it's like we're going to fall behind in AI and keeping us safe from deep fakes and all of these things if we don't have the crypto stuff lined up. And so for me, what that brings to mind is Ocean Protocol, which is part of Trent McConaughey, and the Game B crowd, the big chain DB crowd of and Singularity Net, I guess, even too, this idea of these AI agents trading information tokens and knowledge tokens and sort of building towards the general artificial intelligence, AGI. And that the Biden administration was also repressing AI. That was their other comment. And that is why they had to get involved in the politics, was to solve all of these things. And essentially what they said was that, they would be in politics from now on. Like, they hadn't been in politics up, because everything had been great up until 2021 and they hadn't seen the need. But now they have this PAC, and they have this winning track record, and they can see that they're going to stay in politics as long as it takes, right? But to me, that's also a signal about the tokens that on the one hand are like crypto and fintech, but also the tokens and the tokenized voting, and tokens being an element of the signal in the body politic, and what's going to be coming with coordinating collective swarm intelligence among people and among people and also non-human agents. So them being in politics, you can read that on several layers. And so one of the things they were like, can you believe that they were against this company that wanted to give free loans to poor people? And I think the company was Lend Up, maybe, like mobile banking. They would give small amounts of money to poor people who needed to cover, their banking account until payday, like an answer to payday loans. But of course, to me, I see this and I'm like, well, this is all linked to UBI. And yeah. And then Mark was, talking about the rogue government. The rogue government, all we need, the answer to rogue government would be blockchain smart contracts, right? And Ben was then saying that, crypto is very egalitarian and it's a hedge against inflation. And actually the poor people can have a crypto portfolio, and you're, by restricting crypto, you're hurting poor people. And predominantly, there's a disproportionate number of crypto holders in the Black community. So you're actually like racist if you're against crypto, because crypto has a big following in the Black community among, Black crypto holders and entrepreneurs. So like we can kind of see where that's going in terms of what I'm saying about UBI and sort of the larger eugenics and melanin as optical material, interdimensional computing material ideas that I've been putting out. So so A16Z is going to be aggressive in AI. That's really not a shocker. They can do this under the banner of we have to win because of China. Do not put any limits on industry. I do have a quote in here, and I don't remember where it was. It says, quote, "We could do time travel," Ben says, odd comment. So I guess the time travel stuff is in play. Oh, and then the next big section was all about AI and energy. So AI is the next big thing. It's very energy intensive. The energy is the bottleneck. So you've got the bottlenecks for AI development are chip access, data, and energy. And that AI will not work on the existing grid. And then they kind of go into a discussion about how their good buddy Doug Burgum in North Dakota. And actually, I have a whole blog that I wrote about Burgum in North Dakota when he was governor. He's former Microsoft accounting, now in energy and fracking. And that the North Dakota one was about competency-based education, out-of-school time learning, and that they were going to train all the kids to work for the drone companies, which is appropriate because that comes next in the talk. But so Burgum was saying, yeah, we don't understand. The Biden administration was against the energy folks too, and now look, we've got energy is a huge issue, and we've got Europe that has to buy their energy by the Russian gas because they took all their nuclear offline, and that's really stupid. And so then that is a segue on the energy to next gen nuclear, right? And Mark throws in his shtick that he talks about often that Nixon, even though he was the Environmental Protection Agency guy, also wanted to have 1,000 nuclear power plants with zero emissions, and that A16Z wants to bring that idea back to fruition. And that it's going to help solve the climate problem and open the door to all kinds of new energy, and having the safe nuclear. Which if you listen to the read aloud a little bit that I did out of IRA 11 with This Perfect Day, about the radioactive isotopes off of the injections or whatever. And that's what these thorium reactors, like they pitch the thorium reactors as, and an added benefit is that you have all these radioactive isotopes that you can use for your medical purposes. And when I was listening to that Y-Files discussion about radiation hormesis, which is something I think to me, it comes up with this nuclear aspect. The recommended things on the sidebar, there were at least like 3 for thorium reactors. So, and for people who don't remember, because I have so many videos, but when Drew and Lynn and Jason and I went to the Mormon Transhumanist Conference in the spring of 2022 in Provo, Utah, they actually had a guy there from Brigham Young who worked closely with the Department of Energy on the thorium reactors. So clearly this is coming, modular next-gen nuclear on the blockchain. Okay, so then there was some discussion about the issue with the chips, and that this $40 billion the Biden administration was supposed to release, especially to Intel, to do the chips, like the money hasn't come and it's not flowing and they don't know why. And so essentially everything was just bogging down. And and then at the end, they're talking about defense tech, issues with procurement in defense, and that the old way of doing it was a cost plus model, that you would get the cost to build it plus a 10 to 20% profit, which led to many companies dragging out their R&D process. And so essentially they were proposing new technology solutions in accounting and accountability to sort of turbocharge defense spending. And I would assume that probably would involve some smart contract accounting incentives. I know, again, we have to win because China, right? So all that money still has to keep flowing into the defense. I'm sure none of it would ever be used domestically, right? And then they go into drones, and the drones are the big area of defense tech, that they're especially swarm drones, and that the war in Ukraine is a big pointing out how important the drones are. And there's a competition in the drone war because a lot of the components are Chinese. And so you wouldn't want to have a bunch of drones in a military engagement with the Chinese if your drones are Chinese and spying on you. So we have to make our own drones. But I would say this idea of drone swarms, I think often they think about the weapons being like, I don't know, a laser or a bomb or something. But I think actually the swarm drones might be about creating energy fields for information flows, like on-demand energy fields. So I think that's worth thinking about. And again, they just sort of emphasize that they were not going to comment about Trump and other social issues because, of course, they're in Silicon Valley. But that now, like, the gates are open, and in the crypto space, all these people wanted to build new products under the Biden administration, then they couldn't. But now they want to get into art and music distribution and the NFTs and all of the creative industries in crypto. And so when I've been talking in the past about this tokenization actually being a language and maybe a language of manifestation, the encapsulation and compression of creative ideas of both art and music and other virtual experiences into an NFT type form and then tracking it, like tracking exchanges on the blockchain, I think that's going to be, that represents it in some way. So the shift into the creative economy for NFTs is really important. They mentioned their excitement over WorldCoin probably coming back to the US, even though it had been outlawed. And I think they were invested in WorldCoin with the proof of human, with the eyeball scan. And let's see. Essentially, the message is build now because Trump will not harass you. And then Mark sort of chimes in saying that even though some people say that fintech wants to be lawless, we actually want good crypto law, and we want sort of fair bills about security regulation. There's the issue of, is it a security? Is it a commodity? How is it taxed? And they want clarity around that so that there will be trust in the markets. So anyway, I can take those notes off of my side table, and to me, it's worth listening to them in their own words. But I would say it's, at the end of the day, it's not about Biden and it's not about Trump. It's about oscillating the pendulum back and forth towards this particular goal. And the particular goal is, again, an internet that comes out of the screen and lays on the world and is interacted with through tokens being transferred as in an information theoretic construct. And over time, I think that there is some element of the energy dynamics and the entanglement dynamics that has something to do with the quantum field and consciousness. I'm not sure exactly how to articulate it yet, but I just keep sort of throwing out, it feels like that the token engineering is sort of a language of collective manifestation. And in this Y Files broadcast, which I'll also pin, there's a lot of interfacing of the radiation superpowers, unlocking your ancient genetic potential with this idea of the human potential movement. And, and I would imagine that A16Z and Mark's wife, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen, in the social impact framework, and they're all in, Silicon Valley, Stanford, SRI territory. And actually, I think Stanford law is very big in the blockchain smart contract space too. If you can kind of overlap the econ stuff with the biophysics, the Stanford smart toilet stuff, and the psychological aspect and the tokens, it gets interesting. I'm not saying this to make everybody scared. I'm just sort of giving my sense of the landscape and the patterns that I see and why those particular things were brought up the way that they were brought up, because our consciousness is always being managed through particular stories. So anyway, I hope you have a nice evening, the rest of your day. Yesterday I potted up 50 water jugs, empty water jugs with perennial plants that I need for this. They need winter's cold stratification, like a certain number of days being out and being sort of freeze thaw. So I'm going to wait a few more weeks and then do my annuals, and they're all tucked in. It's very exciting. And, I keep thinking about the entelechy, the idea of the information encoded, in the acorn to grow the oak. Like all these seeds are compressed information, and, this idea of them interfacing with the divine field of intelligence and, sitting out there in the cold. It's pretty cold here. Not as cold as up in the north. I think our low tonight is supposed to be 15, but that's pretty cold for Arkansas. No snow, just clear skies, and maybe I'll go out now and it's getting dark and go check out the skies and see if I can see the planets. I guess they're aligning soon or something like that. So anyway, take care, everybody.